everybody, and welcome to another episode of From Boxes to Butterflies. And today, our topic is going to be on rediscovering joy. And I've got another amazing woman here that I can't wait for her to get to know, for you to get to know her to get to know you. I see you there, Rocky. It's great seeing you. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Margaret. In 2008, Margaret faced the unbearable loss of her 3-day-old son, twin to her daughter, Lily. This devastating experience plunged her into the depths of grief, where she confronted her deepest fears and unearthed layers of trauma. Within her pain, she discovered an unshakable inner strength that ignited her life's purpose: to inspire and empower women to know their true worth, so that they can confidently step into their power while pursuing a life of joy and passion. By guiding other women through their grief, Margaret helps to free them from chains of their past, allowing them to rediscover joy. Today, Margaret stands as a driving force behind EVOLV Coaching, serving as CEO and founder, and is a TEDx speaker, educator, writer, a certified Dare2Declare Vision Board Facilitator, and co-founder of Unshakeable Me, summer camps for teenage girls, and Unshakeable Us, workshops and retreats for mothers and daughters. Margaret is a mom to an amazing teenage daughter, a doggie mom, and seasoned traveler, and a funky shoe addict. So let me bring up Margaret. Hey, Margaret.
Hello. Hey, how are you, Susanna? Thanks so much for having me today.
Oh, I'm glad you were able to come. It's we've got so much going on this month. It's great to have you with this. And then next week we've got the Get Out of Her Damn Way Summit. And
that's going to be crazy.
It's going to be crazy. It's going to be a wild time. But I think we'll just kind of jump into this. And what I'd love for you to do is kind of give a little bit of information on your background, kind of what, as much as you want, what brought you to where you're at now.
Well, I could go back to childhood, but I won't. I think every choice we make along the way sort of leads us to the path that we were meant to follow. So for me, I'll focus mostly on where I am with grief, right? So that is the area that I work in primarily. And for me, really, my grief journey started when I lost my son. And I don't know if anyone's ever lost a child before or know someone who has, but it's undescribable. I still have no words for it. And for me, I had gone through 6 years of infertility as well. So when we got pregnant with the twins, we were ecstatic. And then having lost, they came early, very early. So they came at 5.5 months. My son passed away 3 days later. And then my daughter was in the hospital for 6.5 months before we were able to bring her home. So when I brought her home, she was the size of a newborn. She was 5.5 pounds. And so when you're thrown into a position like that as a new mom, and you have two and one passes and one doesn't, you have to make a choice. Do I grieve or do I love? Because you cannot do the same. That's something I learned is grief comes out of love, but you cannot feel those emotions simultaneously. You can flip back and forth really quickly, but you cannot feel love and feel grief at the same time. So for me, it was survival, really, for me and for my daughter. I needed to be there for her. So I chose to live in the love. And I really did bury my grief for a very long time. Because I focused on her. She was trying to survive. And so it was daily visits to the hospital. It was loving her, holding her, making sure that she thrived. And she did. She truly, truly has. She will be 15 in just over a month. And she really is my inspiration. And she's my warrior. Yeah. But it was a travel. It was a journey for sure. And what I learned going through that process too is everyone in our family grieved, right? My parents grieved, my in-laws grieved, my ex-husband grieved, my my daughter, even as the twin, would have recognized that, right? When you're a twin, you have such a connection. And so for her, it was watching that journey of grief. And that was, as I went through it with her and she came to actually fully understand what death was and that she had lost a brother, she grieved again, right? Like when you're a little child, you don't really understand it. But when she was about 4, she did. And that was devastating for her. But it was supporting her and talking to her and answering all her questions as she grew up with grief, right? It was like, "Mommy, where do you think he is? What do you think Isaac's doing?" And so we would talk about him being in heaven and we would talk about who was looking after him. And I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'm doing okay, right? I can talk about him. I can cry with my daughter when I feel sad and she can cry with me. And when I'm in the car and something, hits my heart, I cry too. And I must be doing great. I must be doing really well because I can talk about him now. It doesn't bring me to my knees with grief like I thought it would." And then fast forward to 2021 when I got asked to do the TED Talk. And I thought, well, I've always wanted to tell my story. Let me do that. Yeah, I had not grieved, apparently, because then I sat down to write my TED Talk and I literally wrote through tears. And I think writing was probably the most cathartic healing for me. Because as I started writing my story and writing the feelings and writing what had happened, everything came out. And I realized at that moment, and through doing the research about grief, our society totally sucks when it comes to dealing with grief. We don't talk about it. We don't teach people how to deal with it. We don't provide as much support as we should. Yes, we provide bereavement groups and we provide therapy, but if you think about it, that's shuffling you off somewhere where the greater amount of society can't see you, right? Grief is something that you need to experience on your own. And it's a very unique experience. Every single person experiences grief on their own. So even though I've lost a child and somebody else has lost a child, our experiences are completely different. And I think that's something that we don't understand as people who grieve. And people who not necessarily people who grieve, but people who are trying to support them, right? When you come up to someone and you say, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel." No, you don't. And I advise so many people, I do a lot of education around grief. It's like, don't say that to somebody because you really, really don't. Unless you are them, you don't know. You may sympathize with them and try to understand, but you don't. So my journey up to where I am today really got launched in 2021 when I did the TED Talk and talking about what my daughter went through and how she grieved so openly and honestly and fiercely and was able to talk about it, whereas we as adults are not. We get 3 days to grieve and then back to work you go. And we hope you show up exactly how you were a week ago. Sorry that you lost your spouse. Sorry that you lost your parents. Sorry that you experienced this, but we have a job to do. So here you go. And there's not really those supports out there for people. And so people end up taking time off and all of that. But it has catapulted me into the world of grief. And I feel very strongly and passionately about educating people around it, talking about it. And I coach women through it too. And I hesitated, I'll be honest, I hesitated going into actually coaching one-on-one with women. I was coaching women already, but coaching around grief scared me.
Mhm.
Because I was afraid that their emotions and their experiences I would take on. I'm very empathic. I feel everything everybody feels. And so I was a little bit nervous. And then I coached through with a client and it was the most rewarding experience. It was so beautiful to watch my client move from a space of debilitation and feeling so stuck in her grief to a place where she could smile. And 3 months later, after coaching, she's like coming to the calls with sparkle in her eyes and figuring out where she wants to be. And so for me, the journey has been a personal one, but also professional. And it's so exciting. And I'm very passionate about being able to support women through their journey as well.
Well,
So
and
that's the grief side.
eh, well, yeah, but grief is such an open-ended thing, and
Mhm,
we don't always know when we're grieving. And like you said, it's so easy to think that you've done it, you're done,
mhm.
you're over it, and then suddenly out of the blue, you just get hit and knocked over.
Oh,
You know,
100%.
I had
Yeah,
something like that
100%.
happen to me this summer, where it's like
Mhm,
I kind of knew my family. I don't have a family anymore because of some stuff that went on because they can't accept me. But I thought I was over that, And then I meet with my aunt and we have a great time. And the next day I realize everybody's at my dad's place and I'm the unwanted child.
Mm-hmm.
And it just hit me like that. And it's like, that's when my first book was getting ready to come out, the collaboration book.
Mm-hmm.
This is supposed to be the most exciting time. And suddenly out of nowhere comes the grief that I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
expecting. You got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then another aspect of it popped out and it's like, just pull away from social media, pull away from everybody except for your best friends
Mm-hmm.
and grieve.
Mm-hmm. And that is exactly what you should do. Like, kudos to you for recognizing what you needed and doing it, because we do need that space and that time. We do need the opportunity and the permission. We need to give ourselves permission to feel what we feel. And like you just experienced, we never know when that's going to pop up. So
Mm-mm.
one of the things I work with my clients is, okay, let's prepare for those times, right? We're going to deal with where you feel now, but what happens 2 years down the road, or a year down the road, or 6 months down the road, when something else comes up for you? How do you want to handle that? And I think so often we just push it down. We're like, no, I don't have time to deal with that. Or no, it's too hard. It's too scary. I'm afraid I'm going to start crying and never stop. I'm afraid I'm going to get so angry. I'm going to hurt something or someone. But there's a power in releasing the feelings and giving yourself the space to bring the joy in, right? Giving yourself the space to release the sadness, release the anger. And it's not just sadness and anger, it's resentment, it's relief, it's shame, it's guilt, it's all the other emotions that come around grief that we don't really talk about either. Because heaven forbid you should be relieved that someone passed away after fighting a huge illness, or at least you can feel it, but don't say it. Right?
Right.
And so then we don't express it and we push it down.
Well,
And
and go ahead.
yeah. No, I was gonna say it's very, very important. I'm a huge supporter of feel your feelings, let them out, give yourself the space. So you carry it around, and it really starts to affect your health. You start feeling depressed, anxious, you don't sleep, you're making poor decisions. All these things start compounding, and then you have no idea where it's coming from. But it's a lot of the unexpressed, unacknowledged grief. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what grief is too. Like, we talk about the really big ones, right? Death happens. There's definitely grief, but what about, I didn't get the job promotion that I wanted, or my best friend just moved across the country, or um, all kinds of things. I failed my SATs, or I didn't pass my driver's license on the first try. Anything around those times. I got married. I had a baby. Those things also bring grief with them. They're very happy occasions, but there's a loss of something. So when you're
Right.
talking about grief, it's a loss or change in anything. And there is a continuum, or like, there's some that are a little minor, there's some a lot. So I actually developed a grief scale that I give to my clients, and you can pull it off my website for free. That sort of gives you 30 examples. I need to bump it up to about 200, but examples that people can go through and say, oh, has this happened? Has this happened? Has this happened? And it's really just to create that awareness that there's so many different things in our lives that can happen to us that we may not even acknowledge that there's a grief aspect to that. And so we don't deal with it, therefore it builds up. And then you may not have a lot of grief in your life, but over time, those little things build up, and it's like a pressure cooker. And then you're in your 40s and 50s wondering why you're crying all the time. Well,
Mhm.
what have there's some unresolved stuff that needs to be processed. And it's a big deal to do all of that.
Well,
So,
and there's a couple
yeah.
of things that you said that the way you put it, number one, the grief and kind of the way that we're told how to deal with grief,
Mhm.
it fits the boxes that that I talk about so much because we're told instead of being told who we are, what we are, it's like we're told how to grieve, when to grieve,
Mhm.
when and we have social media that's like, no, you can't let me go. You have to keep feeding the social media beast no matter
Mhm.
how you're doing. And that doesn't matter if it's grief, if you're neurodiverse and you need the break, if you've got something that's mental health that's like you need to be on and off, you can't be continuous. And
Mhm.
it's we sit back and go, but the algorithm, the algorithm.
Yeah.
It's like, we need to say the algorithm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
We need to move beyond that box.
Mhm.
So,
We do. We do. I think in those instances, you really need to listen to your soul and your heart and what do they need. I have a beautiful friend who is all about exactly that. She's like, post when you feel it, post when you're there, and ignore the algorithm. She has a thriving business because she shows up authentically and real when she's in that space. But when she's not feeling it, she doesn't do it.
mhm,
So I don't know. There is a lot of pressure, exactly what you said, to show up in a certain way, to be this face that, like they say, when you go on Instagram and Facebook, everybody's showing you the favorite parts and the nice parts and the good parts of themselves. They're not showing you that as soon as they got off the camera, they completely collapsed into tears because it was just too much for them to do. We have this facade, and a lot part of my speech that I did back in 2021 was around not being able to tell people that you're sad, right? It was okay. Like, why can't I tell people I'm sad when they say, "Hey, Margaret, how are you doing today?" If I said I'm sad, you'd be like, "Great. Okay, I'm going to be over there. You go be sad over there." But if I said to them, "Oh my God, you know what? I am so stressed. I am so tired." They're like, "Oh my God, me too. It's work so much." And you bond over that because stress and tiredness are something that have the society has made as these, acceptable terms and ways of being. But you tell somebody that you're sad and you're grieving, people run away from you. And there is actually a biological reason for that, which I discovered because we get into the fight or flight. So when you tell someone you're sad, the other person sees that as a threat to their survival. They look at it and they're like, "Ooh, you're sad. That's scary. It could hurt me. I'm going to push away from you and save myself." And it's very subconscious, but it's why people say to you, "Oh, you know what? You're so strong. You're so brave. Look at what you're going through. You're doing such a good job." They don't say it for you. They say it for them because if they tell their brain that you're going to be brave and strong, whew, they are okay. They're not going to be affected by your sadness. And it's a very interesting realization. So I do a lot of teaching around how do you support people effectively, right? How do you help support someone that actually supports them? So,
well, that
yeah.
that's an important piece right there because I'd never heard anything like that before. To
Mhm.
to to have that fight or flight as from grief, from sadness,
Mhm. Mhm.
and suddenly it just kinda opens the door because so many people, it's like they give you sympathy, and I've been in some posts going back and forth with some friends where it's like sympathy versus empathy,
Mhm.
and there is a big difference between them, especially if it sounds like you too. If I feel it, then it's a much better connection than to hear someone say, "Oh, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, it'll be okay," and you
Mhm.
just it feels kinda hollow.
Mhm. It
It's not
really does.
there,
Yeah.
and then you do your best to just not let them know you caught on and
Mhm. Yeah, and then you as the grieving person are trying really hard not to make the other people feel uncomfortable. Like, how
right,
wrong is that? I'm the one who's just lost a child, and I'm trying to make you not feel uncomfortable. Really? Really? Like but it's true. Like, I know I had to be strong for my daughter. I needed to be there
right,
for her, and that was a choice that I made. But had I only had my son at that time and he had passed, I don't think I would have got out of bed for days or weeks. Like, it would have been a whole different scenario. Um, Interestingly enough, as my daughter was growing up, she got really comfortable talking about her brother to anybody, right? Like,
right.
because for her, it was part of her life. It was just a fact. Just a fact. I had a brother, he died. So we're at the grocery store one day. And we're up at the cash register, and the cashier is just making conversation. And she looks at my daughter and says, "So, do you have any brothers or sisters?" And Lily's like, "Yeah, I had a brother, but he died." And the poor cashier was like, she had no idea what to say, and I, as
No,
the parent, was scrambling to say, "Oh, it's okay, it happened a long time ago, it's all good." But then after I left the store, I thought, "Why did I have to make her feel better? Why couldn't my daughter just say what had happened?" And the cashier go, "Oh, you know what? I'm sorry about that, honey." But no, it just everybody gets flustered, right? And obviously it was definitely not a response she was expecting. But again, it goes to show you our society has not made grief a main trying to think of the right words, but whereas like stress and tired and all of that is really mainstream. When you talk about grief, it's kind of the taboo subject, right? We don't talk about grief. We don't share our sadness and our sorrows because
Right.
maybe, you know, that's a sign of weakness. It's not. But yeah, it's an interesting interesting journey.
Well, and as you talk about that, is your daughter is definitely her authentic self. It's like she's not afraid. She's
Yes.
got no walls built up around her to not say something, to hide it,
Mhm. Mhm.
to whatever. And as you talk about trying to see grief as being more mainstream,
Mhm.
then there's a lot of things because even the anxiety and everything else you said, it's accepted to a point.
Mhm.
And what we really need is to be able, and that's the walls that we keep hiding behind. It's
Mhm.
like we're afraid to let anybody see that part of us, which is why so many people have difficulty engaging. I mean, I've dealt with that
Mhm.
my whole life. So it's like, I know
Mhm.
this topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be able to not, it's not that you have to tell everybody. You just aren't afraid. The way I put it is when you no longer fear, fear no longer controls you.
Mhm.
When you control fear, fear no longer controls you.
Mhm.
And that's really what it comes down to. Because then, like your daughter, she talks about it. That's just who she is, and that's just what she does.
Mhm.
For some of us, you're finding the ways to make the excuses for it, or
Mhm.
you're worried about how the other person's going to feel, which means the wall is up and you're hiding yourself. If the wall
Mhm.
isn't up, you don't worry about what they say. You just go on
Mhm.
about the conversation, and that's that.
Yep. And I think a lot of us too, when we're grieving, if we've been hurt really deeply, um, like through a family loss, there's almost like an expectation in society that we should be over it in a certain amount of time. But there's kind of a double standard with this. It's so let me give you an example. So if you lost a spouse, there's two sides to that, right? Say your spouse was really sick with cancer and had been sick for a year or two, and you were literally grieving through that whole process. It's called anticipatory grief, and so you're in that constant grieving process, and then it happens, and and you grieve for the actual loss. So I've seen different things in society with people that I've known. So some people, they get the spouse who's left behind, they've been grieving a long time, and they've probably come to terms with things, and they have not well, they've had a lot of time to process the loss before it actually happens. And I find that what happens in situations like that is if that particular spouse goes out and they happen to meet someone 3, 6 months later and they're in a relationship, society judges them so harshly, like, "How
Mhm.
could you do that? They only died 6 months ago." And it's like, "Yes, but I grieved for the last 3 years. I
Right.
and they're not here anymore, so why can't I be happy?" So society judges you for that, right? You can't be in that relationship. Flip that over, and this person 6 months later is still crying and can't go out and go out in public, has a really hard time socializing because 'cause they're really deeply grieving. Oh my goodness, you should be over it by now, or you shouldn't be this sad still, or there and so there's all kinds of judgments coming at you from what people expect and what society expects, again, around making them feel comfortable and what the standards are. So, it's a double-edged sword. I think no matter what you do, you just have to do what's right for you.
That's really what it comes down to. My mom
Mhm.
passed from Alzheimer's, and I ended up being the
I'm
last one to
sorry.
see her. So I didn't understand. I mean, I started some other aspects of my own reinvention about the same time she passed. Yet I had that 5 years. And during that 5 years, I was actually traveling as well. So I saw the decline crazily because
Mm-hmm.
I don't see her for a couple of months, then I see her. I don't see her for a couple of months, then I see her and
Mm-hmm.
see how she's changing. But when she passed, when my dad said she's gone, and I find out she left less than an hour after I had seen her, I was the last to see her. I realized how fast I got off the phone with my dad because I couldn't hold it. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't expect it to hit me like that and to hit me over and over for the next 6 months to a year. The
Mm-hmm.
anniversary is always a tough time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it wasn't so tough this year because, one, we had a lot of stuff to
Mm-hmm.
do with the summit coming up,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, we can grieve through the process, but it's still gonna be different how each of us gets hit
It
after
is.
after it happens.
Yeah. And I really think that there should be no expectations put on people as to how they grieve, how long they grieve,
Mhm.
what they choose to do in their life. And I know one of the things we wanted to talk about is rediscovering joy, right? How do you come from this place of experiencing deep grief and then moving into a place of feeling joy? It is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen, just when you say that it's going to happen. It's a choice that you make to move forward, and understanding that that kind of grief will live with you forever. You don't ever get over it. It doesn't ever go away because it lives in your body as part of your body memory. And it just becomes, for a lot of people, it becomes less intense over time. But I'm 15 years into it, and I will look at my daughter sometimes and get teary, wondering what would her life have been like had her brother survived, right?
Right.
What, they're at an age now where they would be very independent doing things together, and what would that be like? And we missed out on having a son. And so I do get a little teary. I'll hear songs on the radio and I still cry. Does it dominate my life? Do I feel grief all the time? No. It's fleeting moments here and there. I think about him every day. That will never go away. So when I say grief never goes away, it doesn't. It becomes part of who you are. So then it's, how do I intentionally make choices in my life to allow myself to grieve, allow myself to honor what happened or who I lost or any or what the situation was, and then continue to move forward without feeling guilty, without feeling ashamed or anger, and release all the stuff that no longer serves me. Hold that memory somewhere close that makes me happy to think about it. And then live a life full of joy. And it takes time to get to that point. Sometimes it's a total reconstruction of who you are.
Right.
If you were a wife and you lost your partner, or a husband and lost your partner, you're now a widow or a widower, and you have to redefine who you are. Like, your social circle may change, what you enjoy doing. Maybe finally you'll be able to do the things that you always wanted to do that your spouse didn't want to do. But it's intentionally making those choices and deciding that you're not going to let grief or trauma or whatever it is that you've been through determine and control your life. You're not going to be defined by it. It's still going to be there. That's okay. It's okay for it still to be there, but releasing the emotions that are attached to it, allowing yourself to experience them however many times you need to, and then opening the room for joy to come in, because the people who have gone don't want you to live in sadness and guilt and shame.
No.
Maybe one or two do.
Yes.
Depending on the people, but they want you to live a life. They want you to be happy. They want you to go out and live
Oh, looks like we had it freeze a
people
minute.
around you.
There we go.
So it's I think finding joy really is an intentional choice. And so what I find is, you get to a point in your grief that you're like, okay, I can't go on like this anymore. I can't be like this anymore. And you wake up to that. And maybe sometimes it's a friend pointing it out to you, but it's also something you have to come to terms with on your own and say, okay, you know what? I'm being sad all the time. I'm done doing this all the time. It's not that I'm not going to let the sadness in. I'm just not going to let it be the main focus of my day, the main emotion of my day. And what do you start to do? Maybe it's figuring out again, oh, you know what? I really love to go for a walk. I'm going to go for a walk once a day or once a week to start bringing that joy back in, and then creating a life around the things that really bring you joy. So, yeah.
Well, and that's it's that being able to not let the grief take over.
Mhm.
It's got to have its moment,
Mhm.
but again, like everything else, you got to be able to say, okay, it's time for me
Mhm.
to move to the next step. You're not gone because I will never stop grieving for this person. It's
Mhm.
just they're always a part of who you are,
Mhm.
but that's living in the past too.
Mhm.
And the longer we stay in the past, if we can't live in the present, then the past becomes our future, and we
Mhm.
just keep dragging the past like chains through everything we do. And there's where'd the joy go? How can you get joy
Exactly.
when you're dragging a whole bunch of chains in the back?
Mhm.
It's kind of like Marley's
Yeah.
ghost.
Exactly. Yeah, you need to learn
I
how
love
to let
Christmas
go of
Carol.
the chains. Yeah.
I think I've got
Yeah.
almost all the Christmas Carol movies sitting on a here somewheres.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's
it's
what
that's
it
a
is.
really good analogy. That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Because anything that we hold on to for the past, that is what it's like. And so
Mhm.
grief is no different.
No,
How do
it's
you
not.
lessen the chains? How do you cut the chains?
Mhm. Yeah. I think one of the, well, I've kind of talked about it already, but the biggest thing I find that has been the most helpful for both me and for my clients is really leaning into those feelings that are coming up for you and finding a safe space or safe support. Like if you don't want to do it on your own, finding someone who will hold space for you in a safe place where you can yell and scream if you're angry. I've had clients who've literally, we've gone out to the discount store or the Value Village or whatever, picked up a set of dishes and gone and smashed them because that's what they needed to do. They
Right,
needed to release that anger. I've had clients who, when we start working together, it's they start crying and crying, and it's like, it's okay. I'm going to be here for you as long as you need to. One of the things that we don't share a lot of the time is that when you're feeling an emotion, it's very intense at the beginning. And I think that's why we're so scared of it, right? When you start to feel the tears welling up, we're like, oh, it's going to be too much, or the anger, or whatever it is that you're feeling. We all
right,
feel, oh my goodness, it's going to be too much. The reality is that intensity of that emotion should only last about 90 seconds. So if you can ride out that first 90 seconds of the intensity of the emotion will still be there, but then you'll be like, "Oh, wait a second. Okay, it's not quite as strong, starting to dissipate a little bit." Give yourself 5, 10 minutes to just sit in that feeling and really invite it in. Allow yourself to feel what you feel. Maybe you're feeling shame, maybe you're feeling guilty, maybe you're feeling resentment, um, anger, sadness. Allow yourself to feel it because you will feel lighter. You will feel lighter.
right.
And when people say to me, "Oh my goodness, I'm so afraid I'm going to start crying and I'll never stop." Remember, you know how toddlers cry when they cry and they have a big meltdown and they
Oh,
cry and
yeah.
cry and cry, and they get to
Oh,
the
yeah.
end of it and they get to the end of it and they're like, that's what you will do. And sometimes you'll fall asleep afterwards because it could be a really big expression of energy. And sometimes you'll just be like, "Okay, oh, okay." And it clears your head, it clears your emotions. And like I said, it opens up space for other things to come in. And then you get to choose what you put back in. Is it going to be, I'm going to go for a walk now and bring in the joy of nature? I'm going to sit down and meditate for a while and just really focus on positive things. I'm going to read my favorite book. I'm going to crochet. I'm going to go play basketball. Whatever it is that you want to do that brings you joy. Yes, exactly. I just see that sign from Amber, the anger. It took a while to sit with it to realize it was really grief. 100%.
Right.
Like anger can mask different emotions, can mask the grief very well.
Right.
Very, very well. And that's why we often don't recognize that we're grieving.
Well, and something else that you talked about. So it's like we got the tears, and then of course with
Mhm.
society, it's like many of us can do it, but there's others that is frowned upon. So there's that.
Mhm.
But another thing, something that I found as probably being the most therapeutic for me was the writing. And you talked about
Mhm.
this earlier. To
Mhm.
be able to write, I wrote, for me, it was writing more of a memoir of
Mhm.
kind of recapping what had happened over a couple of years with some deep dives into the past, because
Mhm.
that's so that I don't lose that, but I don't take away from the
Mhm.
overall focus, because
Yes.
that's part of who we are. And
Mhm.
we can't sit there and say, um, "Oh, I never dealt with imposter syndrome. That's not an issue." Well, um, no, I will
Mm.
tell you right now, and for those who like to say it's a mindset, it's a mental thing, they don't believe in it. It's like, um, no, I'll sit down, you listen to my full story, it's
Yeah.
very real, and I've dealt with it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, whether it's that, whatever it is that is causing us pain, when we get it down on the paper, we can be writing, as you said, through tears.
Mhm.
I call that a cleansing tear,
Mhm.
because as you let the tears go, and as you let that go, again, it's to me, it's releasing the past, but you're cleansing, you're opening space up, and you're getting rid of darkness that was inside that you just don't need anymore.
I agree. I agree. Yes, and that's so important. And whether I think it's really important that people find what modality works for them too, right? For you and me, it was writing, right? We're both writers. We both love to speak. It's the stages for right now. For me, it was
Yep,
I love to share my story because I hope that it will help someone. I don't do it for notoriety. I do it for education purposes and to help people realize that there is hope. There you can be joyful again. It will help, but it's finding what works for you. For some people, it's going to the gym. I'm just gonna go punch the bag for, like, an hour, and that's gonna make me feel
exactly.
better. For other people, it's walking or meditating or yoga or, maybe it's cooking. Maybe you love to cook, and that's where you can release some of your emotions. Whatever modality works for you, lean into that when you're grieving. Give yourself permission and the space to do what it is that you need to do to support yourself. And if you need help with it, ask. Your friends don't necessarily know what to do for you. And so I think for us too, initially, when we're in the middle of grief, like when it's an immediate, like at the very beginning of grief, when it's very intense, we have grief brain. It's kind of like the same as mommy brain, right? Like after you've had a baby, you're like, oh my God, you're sleep deprived and you can't make a decision. Everything's foggy. Similar things happen when you're in the initial stages of really intense grief. You go into survival mode. So that's how come you see people being able to make it through a funeral, right? Over the next week, we're just planning, we're that because your grief brain kicks in and just allows you to do one thing at a time that you need to do without feeling it. And I'm not quite sure where I was going with this, but it it was the grief brain is there. And oh my goodness, I've lost my thought completely, Susanna. I was on a roll and I've lost it because I sidetracked for a second. Um, but it's learning what works moving forward. Okay, you're gonna have to redirect me because I completely lost my train of thought. It's gone.
It's totally fine, because it's like, okay, so there's a few squirrels here and there, big deal.
Mhm. Yeah, I have a lot of squirrels in my brain. It's like woo woo all the time.
I think we all do, and one of the things that I found is I kind of really realized this with my mom's grief, because it was the moment that it was Thanksgiving, and I was home alone, but it's like I don't know how to cook less than a 20-pound bird for Thanksgiving. So
Yeah.
it's called leftovers, and my favorite, the Thanksgiving leftover burritos.
Mhm. Yep.
But it's like I had all these cookies that I had baked, and I'm frosting them, and suddenly I start crying.
Mhm.
And it's like two minds at that point.
Mhm.
There's the mind that's crying and grieving and going through that, and the other half that's going, okay, you're doing that. I'm just going to I'm going to keep frosting cookies.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were
It's like,
doing something
oh,
that
where did
was,
this superpower come from?
yeah, it's amazing where we can find our superpowers. Okay. I remember my thought now. It came back. See, the squirrels went out and they've come back. So, what I was going to say is that when we're first grieving, we don't always know what we need, right? We're just making it day by day. We know, like for me, I wanted to go curl up in a corner and cry and rock, and you could commit me. That was all I wanted to do. I didn't want to have to get up and have a shower and get dressed and go to the hospital every day and do all of those. But because we don't know what we need, we don't know what to ask for and we don't know how to ask for it.
Hmm.
So, anyone who's listening to the podcast, I'll give you guys a couple of little tips. If you are supporting someone who is grieving, the best thing you can do is be there for them. And by be there, it's not, okay, I'll see you next week, or I'll be, I'm over here if you need to call me, I'll be around. No, don't wait for someone who's going through this to reach out to you, because they won't. They won't. They'll, first of all, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm too much of an imposition. I don't know what I need to ask
Bingo.
for. I don't maybe want to talk about it." So you who are supporting someone who's grieving, you need to take the initiative, show up at their house with food. I have an article I wrote about, casseroles, but because that's what we got a lot of when we're grieving, our society says, bring food. That's how we show that our support is we bring food. But show up at your friend's house, show up at your relative's house and check in on them. Make sure they've had a shower. Make sure they're not still in their pajamas from 3 weeks ago, and actually be there for them and understand that you might have to be there for more than a couple of weeks. It's not, I'll be there for you for the next couple of weeks and then I'm going back to my own life and good luck. Being there for someone who's grieving it's important, but it's not just a one-off. Right. And it
Right.
is checking in with them. And as they move through the fog and it starts to clear, they're going to be able to tell you a little bit more about what it is that they need. Maybe it's I know you're coming over to see me tonight, but I really just need to be alone. Okay, I'll call you tomorrow. I'll check in on you tomorrow. Or I've just dropped you off like a care package at the front porch to enjoy. Whatever it is. And also sit with them. Ask them how they feel and let them say whatever they're feeling without judgment. Exactly. Sit with them and be silent. Just allow them to express. Maybe it's just they need to just sit there and cry. Let them. Let them. Or, they just maybe want company, but they don't want to talk. Okay. There's so many different ways you can show up. And remember, it's about them. It is not about you. It is 100% about them. You are
Exactly.
being there for them. And it's important, and my hat goes off to anybody who has been able to support somebody through grief, because it's not easy. It isn't easy to be that support, but it also isn't easy being the person who's grieving, because you know that there's all these expectations of how you're supposed to be, and that's not how you feel you could be or you can be when you're going through that.
Well, and when you talk about sitting there, something I thought of as you talked about just sitting there and letting them cry,
Mhm.
there, I feel like there can be a powerful message just in that moment, because now they're not being judged for crying. They're
Yeah.
allowed to cry. They're being accepted for who they
Mhm.
are. They have to cry in that moment, and they have somebody there who just will let them do it. And then the hardest part is that is like, okay, so how much is like, do you touch the shoulder? Do you give them the hug? Do you, and you just play that one by ear, but at least you
Yeah.
let them cry.
Mhm. Well, and if they'll let you hug them, hug them.
Right.
Because there's a lot of research behind the power of physical touch, right? If
Mhm.
you hug someone, if you're there 20, 30 seconds, you start to release, I think it's 20, 30 seconds. It may be slightly longer, but you start to release oxytocin, I think, which is your feel good chemical in the body. And so even if you just put your arm around them and let them snuggle in, that's going to help. And it's an incredible way of helping someone heal and soothe without being totally invasive. And you don't have to say a word, right? It's a very powerful healing modality. So get hugs. Hugs are good.
Hugs are always good.
Yeah.
So as I'm thinking about next week with
Mm-hmm.
the summit,
Yes.
and you get to talk, and you're going to be talking, is it going to be much of the same, or are you how are you looking to
Ah,
focus that conversation,
that's a really
or
good
are you
question.
going to punt depending on what Tracy does?
I think it really depends what Tracy asked me. I know my focus for next year, the title of what we're going to be talking about is around becoming unbreakable. Or sorry, unshakable, not unbreakable, unshakable. And that came out of if I can just share a little bit about the other side of what I do. Um, Working with the women that I work with, seeing, helping them through their grief. A lot of the time when we're going into, oh my God, I'm feeling so sad, I'm feeling so angry, I do a process with them called emotional transcendence. And we go in and they start to feel the emotions, but as those emotions release, there's others underneath. And when we start digging into the ones underneath, about 99% of the time we end up that feeling started back in childhood or teenage years. And so a colleague of mine and I, just on a whim, just thought it would be a really not really on a whim, but it was a very quick decision. We decided to create the Unshakeable Me summer camps for teenage girls this past year. We ran
Right.
2 camps, and it's all around teaching girls how to deal with their emotions, how to
Hmm.
look internally for validation, and so that speaks more to the coaching side of what I do. But we thought if we could go back to the source, like how many of us had things happen to us in our childhood and teenage years that have left us scarred, had grief events, whether we were bullied in school or we failed courses or we weren't treated very well by our parents or our friends. Those are grief events that have happened as well. But what if we went back and we worked with those girls and help them see that they can look to themselves for validation rather than worrying about what's going on in the world and all their very important world? But we teach them about belonging versus fitting in. We teach them about setting boundaries. We teach them about, how are they unique and what makes them unique and that it's okay to be unique. We talk about how do you manage your emotions and how do you identify them accurately. You're sad. Okay, but are you sad or are you disappointed? Are you frustrated? We work on it that level. So our idea was if we could start working with the girls, then maybe by the time they get into their 40s and 50s and are dealing with a whole lot of stuff happening in life, they have some tools already to support themselves. So
Right.
when they get hit with things like grief, they get hit with things like job loss or losing a parent, it's not that it's not going to hurt. It will. But how do you deal with it? Maybe we've already got some tools for them, and just giving them the inner strength to really know that they can um, rely on themselves for their own way of being. And I think when we give the girls that, we really empower them in being their own selves. And I think that's really, really important. If I'd had a camp like that when I was a kid, I don't know how that would have, I think it would have impacted me very well. I can't say I don't know
Right.
how. I think, yes, it would have impacted me. And so our goal is to impact as many girls as we can, to help give
Well,
them those tools. So,
and what you might get out of that as well is they've got the tools, so when their kids get that age,
mhm,
they can pass the tools and just
exactly. They can,
grow it.
yeah. So we
But you
teach
have
them how
another
to
camp
become,
too.
pardon me?
You have another camp with that too.
We do. We do. We have the Unshakable Me. We have the Unshakable Me for the teenage girls, and we have the Unshakable Us for mothers and daughters. And that one we focus on workshops and retreats to teach mothers and daughters how to communicate and connect, because a lot of the time we are not doing that as well as we could be, or there's been a disconnect. And how do we get back to that? So and our retreats are not just focused on mother and teenage daughter. They're focused on mothers and daughters of any ages
Right.
and women who don't have daughters, but they were a daughter, and daughters who've lost their mother and they can't do the healing in person. All of these workshops will help them deal with their own wounds that have happened and just release and heal whatever needs to be healed so that you don't pass that down to your own children. And teaching that communication and that connection between a mother and daughter is so incredibly important. And it helps both sides of the equation. So that's something we're really passionate about. We've done one workshop, and we've got a retreat and a few other workshops booked already for the rest of the year. So we're very excited for that too.
Well, and I've loved how during the Dare2Declare meetings, when you talked about that, it resonated with me, because that's something else I would love to do with when I'm working with the vision boards, and the power word is to focus on the girls, the high school, the upper junior high, middle, but high school, and get them to see that they don't have to listen to the social media, and basically they can take control back of their lives. Don't give control to outside sources. Keep it yourself, and have the boundaries, like you said.
Yeah, so those are just things that they don't teach them in school, right? They teach them
No,
how to read and write, but they don't teach them how to be. And they don't teach them how to build themselves up. They don't teach them about self-esteem and self-respect and self-worth and self-confidence. In fact, which surprises me, but it's something that's so important. Thank you, Amber. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's a passion, and doing the camps and the workshops for Unshakeable Me and Unshakable Us it's a purpose that seems so much bigger than me, and it's so needed.
it
So I
is.
see it.
And,
I see it growing.
well, I do too, because it's like, okay, you've got the northern side of the border. Let's see if we can do something like this on the southern side of the border too.
Well, that's interesting. You should say that. We are looking to find partners and sponsors and funding and for all of this, so we can take it as far. Well, my goal is worldwide. I would love to take it out there.
Right.
Because I think every single girl in the world deserves to have the opportunity presented to her to be the best person that she can be, and not have to
Exactly.
rely on the outside world to determine who she is. And if we can take it out there, then that's where we want to go. That's the goal. That's the vision. It's actually on my board back there.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
see Janice is here. At least with Janice, I've got somebody that's local for me. So
There you go. Yes, they are very negatively impacted by social media and fear of missing out. Oh my goodness. Social
oh yeah,
media has become like the devil. It's just, there's so much online bullying and so much online comparison, and, chalk COVID into there, where the girls, especially in my daughter's age group, she was going into grade 7 when COVID, like she was halfway through grade 6 going into grade 7 when they shut everything down. And granted, those are probably the best years they could have shut her down, because we know girls in grade 7 and 8 are not nice. We are not nice people. And I don't know why. I'm sure there's some primitive, trying to get up the ladder to get noticed. But yeah, the girl, like all of the kids, boys and girls, suffered from this, where they were in isolation. You didn't get to have those social
right.
connections. And so the kids' development and social development and emotional development is behind. And now we're putting them back into school, and now they're a couple of grades up, and they're catching up with all of that too, right? They're catching up with the social, they're catching up with the emotional growth, and there's a lot of disconnect. And even at our camps this summer, we've had kids that came in that we were the first group they'd been a part of since COVID. And so the first time coming in with us, we only had 12 girls. And for them, it was very overwhelming. It was like, how do we integrate? And so it was a lot of support with the girls too. But yeah, when they were all isolated, they lived on social media, they lived on their phones. That's how they connected. It wasn't, I don't know. I remember, I'm not going to age myself, but I grew up without cell phones and internet. So it was a
I'll
long
do it,
time ago.
because it's like I'm
And
58 now. So
okay, well, I'm not too far behind you. Not too far behind you.
and
And
I grew up in the countryside. So for
so did
me,
I.
the state that I was in was surrounded by Canada. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I just
And 2
remember we
time
were
zones.
yeah, exactly. We were sent outside to play, go biking, go climb trees, go build
That's
forts,
it.
right? We didn't and then you learn how to interact with your friends in those contexts that are really face to face, right? So, yes, a lot of the environment in which our kids are growing up is very, very different from what you and I grew up with, and it takes its toll, right? Because kids can be made or broken on the internet. And
Right. And
sad that if you don't teach them the tools ahead of time to say, you know what, it doesn't matter what anybody else says or anybody else thinks. It's what do you think about yourself? You are a good person. The fact that you're here and you're breathing makes you valid and worthy of being here.
but that
And
comes
we
from
lose track
parents
of that.
too.
It does. It
It's the
definitely comes
parents,
from
it's
parents.
aunts,
Mhm.
uncles, the people
Yeah. And if we're not
who used to be
nurturing our
important.
kids, it is. It's very, very important. There's so many aspects to this, Susanna. I could talk about this forever, but it's
I could too.
and I
I
know we
could
don't
say
have
just
forever, but
no, we're down to like our last 5 minutes here.
yeah,
So
it's a very important topic that has so many layers. But I think just really teaching the kids how to validate themselves and look inwards for their own sense of self-worth and self-confidence and self-esteem is so important. So important. Because then no matter what choices they make in the world, they make them based on what's best for them and what will
and
make them
they should.
happy.
They
Mhm.
need to know what's best for them because
They do.
what others say, I mean, we keep trying to tell adults this. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
how many likes you get. It doesn't matter how many followers you have. What matters is the quality of the
Mhm.
people that are showing up.
Mhm. Yeah, we do a really great exercise that we stole from Brené Brown, which I love. We do this with the girls about the marble jar, right? Who fills
Right.
up your jar and who doesn't? So, who are the people that are going to make you feel good about yourself and who are the people you're going to help make feel good about them? Well, they go in your jar. And those who don't get to be in your jar. And that's okay. So when someone says something to you, it's like, "Are you in my jar?" Nope. Okay, doesn't matter. And if you are in my jar and I still don't like what you're saying, I might consider what you're talking about. Like it's that whole idea of really understanding who are the important people in your life and who's actually filling up your jar and who isn't. So
Exactly.
I loved that analogy that she provided. And so we do use it at the camps to
I
help
know
the
that
girls
analogy,
understand.
so
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
it
Well, with
is.
with just with just a few minutes, it's like, yes, I
Mhm.
can keep going.
Just a few minutes.
Um, I'd love for you to kind of close some closing words, parting words, and also just as important is to let everybody know where to find you, how to find you,
Okay.
besides the fact that you're north of the border
Yeah, I'm north of the border.
from
I'm
me.
actually in north of the border from you. I'm in Ottawa, Canada, but I do a ton of things virtually. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I'm
Right.
happy to work with you. So my final parting words, I just want everybody to know that they're worth it. It's worth it for you to go through the process. It's worth it for you to do the things that are important to you and to allow yourself to heal. I think that to me would be the parting word is you are worth it. And so many of us forget that. So that would be my parting advice. Where can you find me? My website is www.evolvecoaching.com. So it's www.evolv, no E, coaching.com. And all my contact information is there. And so you can reach out to me via email or phone. I think I took my phone off there, but you can reach me through email and I'm happy to connect. And yeah, so if anybody is interested in learning more, I'd love to speak with you and connect with you as well.
Yeah. Well, everybody that was here today, it's just I know most of them, and they're just awesome people, and there
Mhm.
were a few Canadians in there too.
Yay! Well, thank
So
you so much for having me today, Susanna. I really, really enjoyed today.
I'm so glad that you were able to come. It's like
Mhm.
it's one heck of a way to have our first real conversation too,
I
right?
know. I know. And I love what you're doing. I think this From Boxes to Butterflies is just an incredible movement that you're doing as well. So kudos to you for stepping into that and bringing it to the light.
Well, it's just all our lives, we keep being told who we are, what we're supposed to do. We keep getting put in these boxes, and then we wall up ourselves because we're afraid to let people know something about us.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden people don't engage. It's a great way to keep us separated. Oh, you
Mhm.
can't talk about. Oh, you can't talk about. Well, if we can't talk about who we are, then what's there left to talk about?
Yep. Exactly.
Nope, you gotta
Exactly.
be yourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out and just say thank you, everybody, for your time to come and listen. It was a great conversation. I'm so glad you were here, Margaret.
Thank
And I
you.
can't wait for next week and to
Mhm.
see what happens when you and Tracy have your time together. Which day
Yeah.
next week are you?
Oh, I am Wednesday, September 27th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time.
Okay, so
That's when I'll be on. Mhm.
you're day one. Oh, this is really great. You're day one, and yeah, I think we've got all 3 days covered because I'm on Friday. So,
Oh, fantastic.
and
I'll
for
be
me, it's
watching you.
7 a.m. on Friday. You're 10 o'clock, but
Oh,
mine's 7.
yes. Yeah, so you're opening on Friday. That's wonderful.
I'm number 2 on
I think
Friday,
Oh, you're
actually.
number 2. Okay,
No,
excellent.
it starts at 8:30, so it starts at my
Oh,
5:30.
yes. Oh my goodness, that's right. Okay. Yes, well,
Welcome to the
I'm
West
very
Coast.
excited for next week. Yep. Next week should be
It's
a
gonna be
fantastic
great.
event. So if you haven't joined yet, you have to join the event. It's free. You can go and watch it.
It's
It's amazing.
free, and I did already put a link in the comments before all of this started, so the link is there. I think I put the bio link, and
Mhm.
even within the speaker bio link, there is a registration
Mhm.
piece. So
Yeah.
it's like, go tell them we sent you, and off we go. And other than that,
Excellent.
I'm going to say goodbye, everybody, and thank you for coming.